Today we make a new custom handle for this cross pein hammerhead. I'm here cleaning up some tools that I picked up recently that were all in the bottom of a toolbox that was obviously wet for a long time, so they're very rusty, caked on rust. Some pitting in some of these tools. This is a file, a few spanners in there, but cleaning up these tools, and they're coming up quite well. I've had to use some heat to get them moving. Some of them weren't moving. But in amongst them is this little cross pein hammerhead, and I think I've cleaned that up on the wire wheel after having it in some in that cleaning solution, which just happens to be vinegar. Yeah, so as a quick wire wheel, just gives me an indication of how bad it is. Now I'm going to make a handle for this, and that's the subject of this video. Now, I actually already have one of these cross pein hammers, a little, I used to call it a tack hammer, but it is a cross pein, and it's got quite a long handle on it, hickory handle, and it's all, you know, cheap and nice simple handle. But I thought I'd do something a little bit different, a shorter handle on this, and looking at this timber here, that sort of feels to me like what I'll try and do. I'm going to replicate a similar handle to something I've got on another little wooden headed hammer, but I think something along the lines of this will be quite nice. Now, this is my mock-up. I'm going to cut that out, see how it feels, and then I'll move on to actually making the handle out of this piece of I guess that's Tasmanian blackwood. And this is left over from doing the kitchen bench, not the kitchen, sorry, the bathroom bench. And I was looking at the grain here, and we really need to have the grain going across the handle in line with the head, basically, so this sort of orientation. So that gives us the maximum strength of the grain. Now, I was looking around, the blank that I wanted to produce is about this size, just so I can get that piece out of it. Yep, that looks about right, and the thickness, you know, that'll make a nice handle. So looking around here, moving this around, and I think we've got a nice piece of really effectively straight grain. You know, do you want to call that flat sawn, or do you want to call that well, it is, because it's, if we orient it this way, it is flat sawn, but if we orient it that way, it's quarter sawn. But that'll give us a nice piece. This is a good little way of checking the grain of anything. Just use that cutout. So if I take that section out of this piece, we'll cut that out in the bandsaw, because that's what I've got indoors, and it's raining outside, so we can't get to the tools that are out there. But we'll cut that out, and we'll see how we go from there. Well, here we are in bandsaw land, getting ourselves set up for this cut. I've drawn a line here, and I'm going to freehand this because I think it's the better way of doing it. Having cut this out, we can see that one of these sides is quite a bit nicer. I actually like the feel. We saw that in the little clip before. But what I've done is I've started to mark it out on the stock. So I've used the side that I like the shape of the most from just the raw cut on the bandsaw, and I marked that out, and I just flipped it over and marked out the other side. So I've actually got now a symmetrical shape on there, and I've just drawn some parallel lines here. Also here, I don't want to do it too tight at the moment, but that's the thickness of the tongue there, or tannin. That's probably a correct term for that. Should look up some hammer theory. to know exactly what that is. But that tenon, I'll call it for the time being, will go in there nicely. The width I've got there estimated, and the thickness I've got estimated. I'll cut this out on a bandsaw. Very happy with the way that turned out. So we've got our tenon here. It looks way too big, but that's good. Oh, actually not way too big. Looks about right size. So it's tight there, and it's a little bit loose on that end. Oh no, it's pretty good. This must be a tapered hole, so this is obviously the top of the head, because you want the taper going up, so that when you split this, you put a slice in there, it spreads the top and stops the head coming off. All right, we're ready for a little bit of shaping, so I might work out how I'm going to do that. They'll probably steer away from the disc sander at the moment, but because I find the disc sander burns this timber, so but that just feels like a nice little handle. It's going to be it'll be thinner and lighter than this, but that feels like a nice little handle it's going to complement this guy. This is the hammer that's the inspiration behind the shape of this handle, but I'm starting to drift away from it. As I form this one up, I'm kind of liking this more traditional handle shape. So I might bring that down. I might make this thinner and a little bit, you know, not quite like this, but a little bit more traditional. Now this is the one that I bought off the internet a couple of years ago, back when I was, in fact it must be almost 5 or 10, it must be 10 years ago, back when I was getting some use putting together these hand planes, cleaning up a few hand planes and some wooden hand planes, and even spoke shaves. Actually, it works really well with the old spoke shaves. I was looking at this and I cleaned up the side, similar to this one. I noticed that this one was black at some stage, so there's still some black paint on there. And as I was cleaning the rust away, I noticed there was some markings, so I've cleaned that even further, and I found that it says Made in Australia, Cyclone Foundry. So this is a Cyclone Foundry, and the current headquarters of the parent company that owns the Cyclone brand now is just up the road. So it's quite interesting that there's a little bit of connection in that sense. Cyclone's an Australian company, started making wire back in the 1880s, 89 I think it was formed, 1888, oh, I can't remember the exact date, wasn't around. But anyway, that's so there's a bit more heritage or history or local content or whatever that we want to. Makes me feel better about this little head. I thought it was just a cheapie that was like this one that was hanging around in someone's toolkit. But of course, you can buy an equivalent. You know, this was, I think this was $10 when I bought it a couple of years ago. Okay, let's get on to thinking about reshaping the handle a bit more. Speaking of hand planes, this little German copy is probably a bit blunt, but let's just see if it's got anything. Oh yeah, it's starting to take some timber off, so I could use this. I possibly should put it in the vise to make it easy to hold, but it seems to be working nicely there, and that's going to help us shape it down a bit. So I'll come back once I've done a bit more, and then we'll see what we think about the shape that we're getting. Now for this next bit of work, I think I actually will move over to the disc sander and see whether I can do this without too much burning. I do fear that that is an old disc and it will burn, but I'll just see what it does. But otherwise I'll retreat to the file and hold that in a vise and file it. It's looking good. I'm really happy now. With thinning that down was a really good idea. That's just, it feels really good. Well, I put it on the disc sander a little bit, and yes, we did start to get some burning. So I actually think that the file gave me the best results earlier. So let's just continue with that process and smooth these bits off before we actually dive into sanding it as a final, close to a final finish. I'm looking at these grain patterns here. I'm trying to keep them symmetrical. Although they're not perfect in themselves, they just give you a nice guide to how you're going. There's still a bit of varnish on there from the previous, but I've got the cathedral shape happening here, and I'm just going to see if I can get it to curve back in there on this end. I'm not sure whether it will, but we'll give it a try. Yeah, I'm not sure whether it will. Alright, here we are with some old 100 grit. I think will be perfect for this. And then we'll go finer after this. That's a bump there and a bump there. You can see the dip in the middle. So let's see if we can take that out with the file. I've got the back of the file. You can see it in the contour lines of the timber. There we go, that's coming out. So dip, no. Now the contour lines aren't perfect, so we've just got to be wary of that. But have we removed the dip? For the most part we have, so let's sand that again. Alright, we've got our tung oil open. This is a Feast Watson brand tung oil. Took me a bit to open it. These tung oil tins tend to jam themselves up, seal themselves up really tightly. I've just given it a bit of a stir, and I'm going to apply this with some paper towel. So it's a fairly simple application of tung oil. In fact, we'll wipe the stick with our paper towel, so as not to waste it. And this should really show up the grain in our little handle, and you can see that as soon as you put it on. Now that's not enough, so let's make this really quite damp with tung oil. Don't see a lot of natural colour in this particular tin of tung oil. I was mixing it up to lift it from the bottom. But we'll see how we go. I'll put a light coat on, see what our handle looks like with that. And it's got to say something about this blackwood that makes it pop when you put the oil on. In fact, that happens with most timbers. I'm going to stir that up again and see if we can get a bit more tone to it, because it is in there. No matter whether it's all mixed up. It's not on the bottom, I can feel it. There's a little bit more colour to that as I draw it out. You can see that, not sure whether you can, but I can see there's a little bit more colour to that, so let's use that. It's not a tinted, not a heavily tinted oil, this one. There is a natural, there's a tendency for me to dip it in. There's an impulse for me to dip it in, but I'm not going to do that because that would just contaminate what's inside the tin already. There's that little notch that I'm choosing to ignore because it's going to go away, or it's going to be the first of many as the tool gets used. Let's put a bit more on, starting to look really good. Start at this end, they're hard to get bits. This paper towel does have a tendency to leave little bits behind, so I'm just sort of cautious of that. Let some seep into that end grain. I'll tell you what, that's a nice looking little handle in that colour. Makes me feel really good. No stain. We'll come back and we'll put some more on. And I'm going to use the glad wrap trick on here, which I saw from a panel beating YouTuber who had a lot of expensive paints for his bodywork, and a lot of them are in tins like this, and the thinners and whatnot, and the hardeners and whatnot. So what basically happens with this stuff is it does harden and seal this shut. That's very difficult to open with these silly plastic lids. But I'll put a layer of glad wrap, or plastic wrap, let's call it, and then screw that on, and that should be easy to undo next time I undo it in maybe a couple of years' time. Well, our next step is to do a little bit of whittling to make this into a shape that's going to fit into the eye of our head. So the approach, I think, is to just use our whittling knife and carving knife and get that down to more of a round shape. I did try it with a file and it just wasn't, we'll do some finishing with the file, it just wasn't quick enough. So just removing a bit of this timber here. Well, we've put the head on. I've put in a couple of aluminium wedges into the slots there. I narrowed down the aluminium point, made it into a point, and put it into slots, hammered them in. So, and they go down maybe 5 or 6 millimeters, maybe a bit more. And then we've just smoothed that off, file and sandpaper. So basically the last step now is just to give it a bit of a wax coating to make it to finish it off. So this is just some beeswax that I've got lying around. We'll put some on, and even the metal to help preserve that. I do like that finish that I've got there. I'll put a little bit more on. This wax I've had for many years, this pot of wax, probably over 20 years actually, because I remember buying it for a mantelpiece job in our front room when we first bought the house. Okay. Wax all over. Heavy coat, and then we'll wipe it off with a nice clean, well, clean, the one that we've been working on top of. Use this to wipe it off. Get a bit of a polish on it. Dull polish at least. should just make the timber handle pop a little bit. And prepare it for use with that sort of patina. Alright, that feels really nice. A little matte finish with this wax. I noted that when I first used it. There we have it. Little Aussie battler. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you're happy with this sort of content, and we'll see if we can make some more videos in the Proto 49 workshop using the mighty mini workbench.